In the fading light of an autumn evening in Ashford, Tennessee, a young woman's silent scream for help went unheard by everyone around her. Trapped in a nightmare she couldn't voice, stalked by a predator who knew she couldn't call for help, Mallory Sinclair was running out of time and options. When she burst through the doors of a quiet cafe, desperately signing to strangers who couldn't understand, she had no idea that the man sitting by the window with his little daughter would become the answer to prayers she didn't know how to speak. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The autumn evening had turned the streets of Ashford into a beautiful trap. 24-year-old Mallory Sinclair's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to her grocery bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape, and the man in the gray hoodie, the one who had been haunting her life for 2 weeks, was still there, 20 feet behind her, matching her pace step for step. She had made a terrible mistake today. In her rush to grab milk and bread from the corner store, she had left her phone charging on her nightstand. It was supposed to be a quick errand. 10 minutes, maybe 15. What could possibly happen? Everything. Everything could happen.
Mallory's blood turned to ice when she stepped out of the store and saw him across the street. The gray hoodie, those cold, calculating eyes, watching her like a hunter watches prey. She walked faster. He crossed the street. She turned left. So did he. She broke into a near run. His footsteps matched hers perfectly. She couldn't hear if he was getting closer. She couldn't call out for help. She couldn't even know if she was screaming. And her phone, the one lifeline that could have helped her communicate with the hearing world, that could have called for help, was sitting uselessly miles away. The street was emptying as darkness crept in. A young couple walked past, absorbed in their own world. Mallory rushed toward them, her hands moving frantically in sign language. "Please, help me. Someone is following me. I'm scared." The couple looked at her with confusion that quickly shifted to discomfort. The woman clutched her purse tighter. The man shook his head apologetically, and they hurried away, clearly not understanding a single gesture she had made. Mallory's chest tightened painfully. She looked back. The man in the gray hoodie had stopped pretending. He was staring directly at her now, a slow, terrible smile spreading across his face. He knew. He knew she was running out of options. She ran.
Her feet carried her toward the main street where shops were still open, where people were still moving about. She spotted an elderly man locking up his hardware store and rushed toward him, her hands flying desperately through the air. "Please, call the police. That man is following me. Please." The elderly man squinted at her, then shook his head sadly and pointed to his ear. He didn't understand. He patted her shoulder kindly, said something she couldn't read on his lips, and walked away toward his car. Tears were streaming down Mallory's face now. The gray hoodie man was leaning against a lamppost across the street, watching her struggle, waiting, patient. He knew she was trapped in a nightmare where she could see everyone but couldn't make anyone see her. That's when she saw it, the warm glow of Brennan's Corner Cafe spilling onto the darkening sidewalk. Through the large windows she could see people inside, families, couples, individuals reading books or working on laptops. Someone in there had to understand her. Someone had to help. She pushed through the door so hard that several heads turned. A waitress called out something, but Mallory was already moving, approaching the first table she saw. A middle-aged woman sat with a cup of coffee and a magazine. Mallory signed rapidly, her hands trembling. "Please, I need help. A man is following me. I'm deaf. Please help me." The elderly woman's eyes went wide with alarm, but not understanding. She held up her hands helplessly and called out to someone, probably her husband, who came over looking equally confused and concerned. Mallory moved to the next table. A group of college students looked up from their textbooks, their young faces reflecting confusion and uncertainty. "Can anyone understand me, please? I'm in danger." One of the students pulled out his phone, perhaps trying to find a translation app, but his friends were already looking uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, clearly not knowing how to respond to this panicked woman making gestures they couldn't comprehend. Mallory felt the last threads of hope slipping through her fingers like sand. She was surrounded by people, yet completely alone, invisible, silent in a way that had nothing to do with her deafness and everything to do with the wall between her world and theirs. The cafe door opened behind her with a soft chime. She didn't have to turn around to know who had just walked in. She could feel it, that cold presence that had been haunting her for 2 weeks, that had turned her life into a waking nightmare. He was inside now. The last safe space was no longer safe. Through her tears, through the blur of panic and desperation, she scanned the room one final time, and that's when she saw him. A man sitting by the window with a little girl, maybe 4 years old. Unlike everyone else who had looked at her with confusion or pity or discomfort, this man was watching her with something different in his eyes. Concern, focus, understanding. Something about the way he was looking at her made Mallory move toward him. Desperation, instinct. She approached his table, her hands shaking so badly she could barely form the signs. Her vision was blurred with tears, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she forced her hands to move. "Please, help me. That man, he won't stop following me. He's been stalking me for weeks. I don't have my phone. I can't call for help. Please." For a moment, time seemed to stop. And then the man raised his hands and signed back, slowly, clearly, making sure she could understand every word. "I understand you. You're safe now. I'm going to help you. What's your name?" The relief that washed over Mallory's face was so profound, so overwhelming that it was almost too much to bear. Her whole body sagged. Her knees nearly gave out. For a moment, her hands couldn't form words at all. They just trembled in the air between them, suspended in a moment of pure, desperate gratitude. Someone understood her. Someone saw her. She wasn't invisible anymore. "Mallory," she finally signed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My name is Mallory." "I'm Wyatt," the man signed back, his movements fluid and natural, like he had been signing his entire life. "Stay right here with me and my daughter. I won't let anything happen to you." "Julie, honey, this nice lady is going to sit with us for a little while, okay? She's having a very scary day, and we're going to help her." "Okay, Daddy," Julie said, her little face suddenly serious in the way children become when they sense something important is happening. "Is a bad guy being mean to her?" "Something like that, sweetheart. I need you to stay right here and be very brave. Can you do that for Daddy?" Julie nodded solemnly. Wyatt stood and guided Mallory into the seat next to Julie, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the man in the gray hoodie. He signed to Mallory as he moved. "I'm going to tell them to call the police. Don't worry, he's not going to touch you." He walked directly toward the cafe counter, where a young barista named Stephanie was wiping down the espresso machine. His voice was low but urgent, every word deliberate. "Call the police right now. That man by the door has been stalking the woman at my table. She's deaf and doesn't have her phone. She's been trying to get help, but no one understood her. Don't let him leave." Stephanie's face went pale, but she was already reaching for the phone under the counter, her hands moving quickly as she dialed. Wyatt returned to the table and sat down across from Mallory. He signed to her, his movements calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "The police are on their way. Can you tell me more about what's been happening?" Mallory's hands were still shaking, but she managed to sign back, each gesture laden with weeks of accumulated fear. "He's been following me for 2 weeks, outside my work at the bookstore, at the grocery store, outside my apartment building. I reported it to the police, but they said they couldn't do anything without evidence. Today was my day off. I just went out to get a few things. I didn't bring my phone. I didn't think I'd need it. And then I saw him again. He followed me for blocks. I tried to get help, but no one understood me. No one could hear me." The last sign, "here," carried a weight that went beyond the physical act of hearing. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "You did the right thing coming in here. You're not alone anymore." Julie, who had been watching the exchange with fascination, tugged on Wyatt's sleeve. "Daddy, why is the pretty lady talking with her hands?" "She's deaf, sweetheart. That means she can't hear sounds the way we do, so she talks with her hands instead. And I learned how to understand her a long time ago because Uncle Micah talks the same way." Julie's eyes went wide with wonder rather than confusion. "Like Uncle Micah? That's so cool!" She turned to Mallory with the pure, unfiltered compassion that only children possess, completely unburdened by the awkwardness that made adults turn away. "Don't be sad, pretty lady. My daddy is the best helper in the whole wide world. He even fixed my teddy bear's arm when it fell off, and now Mr. Snuggles is good as new." Mallory couldn't hear the words, but she watched Julie's animated little face, the way her tiny hands moved with emphasis, the way her eyes sparkled with earnest reassurance. And somehow, despite everything, despite the terror still coursing through her veins, despite the man in the gray hoodie 15 feet away, despite 2 weeks of living in fear, she felt something warm spreading through her chest. Wyatt signed to Mallory what Julie had said, and Mallory let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, something beautifully human and broken and healing all at once. "Your daughter is precious," she signed. "She's my whole world," Wyatt replied, and something in the way his hands formed those words told Mallory there was a story there, a deep one, but that was for another time. The next few minutes felt like hours stretched thin. The cafe had grown quieter, the normal chatter subdued as people sensed something serious was happening. The man in the gray hoodie must have realized something was wrong because he started moving toward the door, trying to slip out unnoticed. But before he could escape, 2 police officers walked in, alerted by Stephanie's call. The cafe had grown completely silent now, everyone watching as the officers approached the man. One of the officers spoke briefly to Stephanie, who pointed toward Wyatt's table and then toward the man trying to leave. The other officer moved to block the exit. "Excuse me, sir. We need to ask you a few questions." The man in the gray hoodie's face changed from calm to angry to something almost desperate. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just getting coffee." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions." The officer who had spoken to Stephanie came over to Wyatt's table. Wyatt stood, positioning himself between the officer and Mallory, and began interpreting everything that was said, his hands moving fluidly as he translated the conversation. It turned out the man's name was Gregory Dalton, and when the officers ran his information, red flags started appearing immediately. He had prior arrests for harassment and stalking in 2 different states, Missouri and Kentucky. He had apparently fixated on Mallory after seeing her at the bookstore several weeks ago, and he'd been watching her, learning her routine, waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment that would have come tonight if she hadn't walked into this cafe, if she hadn't found someone who could communicate for her. "Ma'am, you're very lucky," one of the officers said, looking at Mallory even though she couldn't hear him. Wyatt interpreted, his face grave. "If you hadn't found someone who could communicate for you tonight, well, we've been looking for Mr. Dalton in connection to another case. He's dangerous." The officer didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Everyone in the cafe understood what he wasn't saying. As they led Gregory Dalton out in handcuffs, the cafe erupted into murmurs and gasps. Several of the people who hadn't understood Mallory earlier now approached her with apologies, with offers of comfort, with guilty faces that said, "I'm sorry I didn't help you." But Mallory barely noticed them. Her eyes were fixed on Wyatt, this stranger who had somehow become her guardian angel in the span of 15 minutes. "Thank you," she signed, and then the dam broke completely. She cried, deep, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. 2 years of living alone after her mother's passing from a severe stroke. 4 years before that of navigating a hearing world that often forgot she existed. 2 weeks of living in fear, of looking over her shoulder, of feeling hunted. And today she had almost become another statistic, another name in a news report, another young woman who disappeared because she couldn't scream loud enough. If she hadn't walked into this cafe, if she hadn't seen Wyatt at the window, if he hadn't known sign language, the alternative was too horrible to contemplate.
Julie tugged on Wyatt's sleeve, her little face scrunched with concern. Daddy, is the pretty lady still sad? She's feeling a lot of things right now, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they're relieved, not just when they're sad. Can I give her a hug? Hugs always make me feel better when I'm scared. Wyatt looked at Mallory and signed the question. My daughter wants to know if she can give you a hug. Mallory nodded, fresh tears spilling over, and when Julie climbed down from her chair and wrapped her little arms around Mallory's waist, something inside Mallory healed just a little, something that had been broken for a very long time. It's okay, pretty lady, Julie said, patting Mallory's back the way Wyatt always patted hers after a nightmare. The bad guy is gone now, and me and Daddy will keep you safe, right, Daddy? That's right, sweetheart. Wyatt signed to Mallory what Julie had said, and Mallory hugged the little girl tighter, her tears falling into Julie's soft brown hair. I don't know how to thank you, Mallory signed when she finally composed herself enough to pull back. You saved my life. You don't owe me anything, Wyatt replied, his hands steady and sure. I'm just glad you found me. But even as he signed those words, Wyatt knew it was more than that. Something had shifted in the universe tonight. Something had clicked into place. He didn't understand it yet, didn't have words or signs for it, but he felt it deep in his bones. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. Over the following weeks, Wyatt found himself thinking about Mallory more than he expected to. It started practical. He gave her his number so she would always have someone to contact in an emergency, someone who would understand her. He helped her navigate the legal process of filing a restraining order against Gregory Dalton, interpreting for her at the police station and the courthouse. But somewhere between the police station and the third courthouse visit, something changed.
Mallory started showing up at Brennan's Corner Cafe on Saturday evenings. At first, she asked if it was okay, if she was intruding on their father-daughter tradition. But Julie had been absolutely delighted at the prospect of seeing the pretty lady again. And Wyatt realized he looked forward to those Saturday evenings in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in a very long time. Julie became obsessed with learning sign language. She would practice throughout the week, then show off her new words each Saturday with the enthusiasm of a child discovering magic. "Daddy, watch!" Julie would say, her little fingers carefully forming signs she'd been rehearsing. Friend, then happy, then love. Did I do it right? Did Miss Mallory see? Was it perfect? Mallory would clap and praise her, signing back encouragement and corrections, and Julie would beam with pride so bright it could light up the entire cafe. I'm going to learn all the words, Julie announced one evening, her face scrunched with determination, so me and Miss Mallory can talk about everything, like princesses and dinosaurs, and why the sky is blue, and why clouds don't fall down even though they're so heavy. Daddy, do you know how to say dinosaur with your hands? Wyatt demonstrated the sign, and Julie practiced it 17 times in a row until she got it exactly right. On the hard days, and there were many for Mallory, Wyatt was there. When she had nightmares about Gregory Dalton finding her again, about being chased through empty streets where no one could understand her screams, Wyatt would text her at 2 a.m. You're safe. He's in jail. You're not alone anymore. When she felt isolated at family gatherings where no one else signed, where cousins and aunts and uncles would talk around her but not to her, Wyatt would stay by her side, interpreting conversations, making sure she was included, making sure she never felt invisible again. When she doubted herself, when she wondered if she would ever feel truly safe again, if she would ever stop looking over her shoulder, if she would ever trust the world again, Wyatt reminded her of her strength. You survived. You fought. You found help. That takes more courage than most people will ever need to have. And in return, Mallory brought light back into Wyatt's life in ways he hadn't even realized were missing. She helped Julie with art projects, revealing a natural talent for painting that made the little girl squeal with absolute delight. They would sit together at Mallory's small apartment, painting wildflowers and imaginary creatures and portraits of Daddy being the strongest man in the world. She taught Wyatt new signs, ones Micah had never used, regional variations and poetic expressions that expanded his vocabulary in ways that felt like discovering new colors in a painting he thought he already knew. And she listened, truly listened, in that profound way that had nothing to do with ears and everything to do with presence, when he talked about things he hadn't spoken about in 2 years. It happened one evening, 4 months after they'd met. Julie had fallen asleep in the booth, her head resting on Wyatt's lap, and the cafe was nearly empty. The waitress was wiping down tables in the back, and the soft jazz music playing overhead created a bubble of privacy around their table. "Can I ask you something?" Mallory signed. "You don't have to answer if it's too personal." "You can ask me anything," Wyatt replied. "Julie mentioned her mommy once. She said her mommy lives in heaven with the angels now." Wyatt's hand stilled for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and began to sign.
Her name was Amelia. We were high school sweethearts, one of those ridiculously young love stories that somehow actually worked. We got married at 22, had Julie at 28. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her better, kinder, happier. His hands paused, and Mallory waited patiently, giving him space. She had a heart defect she didn't know about, something she'd had since birth, but it never caused problems until it did. One day she was dancing with Julie in our kitchen, laughing at some silly song on the radio. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a cemetery, holding our daughter's hand, trying to explain why Mommy wasn't coming home. "I'm so sorry," Mallory signed, her eyes glistening. "It's been 2 years. Some days are better than others. But Julie saved me. She gave me a reason to keep going when I didn't think I could. Every time I look at her, I see Amelia's smile, Amelia's laugh, Amelia's big heart. And I know I have to be enough for both of us." "You're an amazing father," Mallory signed. "Anyone can see how loved Julie is. You're not just enough, you're everything she needs." Something in Wyatt's chest loosened at those words. Something that had been wound tight for 2 years finally began to breathe again. "What about you?" he signed. "You mentioned losing your mother." 2 years ago, Mallory signed back. "Severe stroke. She was only 53. It was just the two of us. My father left when I was young, couldn't handle having a deaf daughter. My mother learned sign language, became my advocate, my interpreter, my best friend. When she died, I lost the one person in the world who truly understood me. Until now," Wyatt signed. Mallory looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that didn't need words or signs. A recognition, a connection, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they had been brought together for a reason neither of them could have predicted. 6 months after that terrifying evening in the cafe, Wyatt found himself standing outside Mallory's apartment building, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hand, her favorite, he had learned. His heart was pounding almost as hard as it had the night they met, but for entirely different reasons. When Mallory opened the door, her surprise shifted quickly to curiosity. "What are you doing here?" she signed. "Is Julie okay?" "Julie's fine. She's with my mom for the evening. I'm here because I needed to tell you something, and I needed to do it alone." Mallory stepped back, letting him into her small but warmly decorated apartment. He handed her the sunflowers, and she buried her face in them for a moment before setting them carefully on her kitchen counter. "What did you need to tell me?" she signed, her hands betraying a slight tremor. Wyatt took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that could change everything or nothing. The moment that could open a door or close one forever. "I know this might seem sudden," he signed, "but I've been thinking about this for a while. I think I fell in love with you somewhere between the cafe and now. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know if it was too soon after Amelia, or if you'd think I was only with you out of gratitude, or if I was crazy for feeling this way about someone I've only known for 6 months. He paused, his hands suspended in the air between them. "But then I realized that life is too short and too unpredictable to waste time being afraid. You taught me that. You walked into that cafe 6 months ago with nothing but desperation and courage, and you changed everything. You brought light back into my life. You gave Julie someone who understands her in ways I never could. You made me remember what it feels like to want something for myself, not just for my daughter. And what I want is you."
Mallory stared at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst through her chest. Tears were already streaming down her face, but she was smiling, that beautiful, heartbreaking smile that Wyatt had come to love more than he thought possible.
"It's not sudden," she signed back, her hands shaking with emotion. "I've been waiting for you to say it. I've been in love with you since the third Saturday, when Julie spelled my name wrong in sign language and you corrected her so gently, so patiently. I've been in love with you since you stayed up until 3 in the morning texting me through a panic attack. I've been in love with you since I realized that when I picture my future, you and Julie are in every single version of it." Wyatt closed the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms. They stood there in her small kitchen, holding each other like they were the only 2 people in the world, the sunflowers forgotten on the counter, the evening light fading outside the window. When they finally pulled apart, Wyatt signed, "There's someone else who wants to ask you something." On cue, there was a knock at the door. Mallory looked confused, but when she opened it, there stood Julie, holding a handmade card covered in glitter and stickers. "Surprise!" Julie shouted, then immediately switched to signing as she'd been practicing. "We love you. Will you be part of our family?" Behind Julie stood Wyatt's mother, grinning widely, clearly in on the whole plan. Mallory scooped Julie into her arms, card and all, and the 4 of them stood in the doorway, a family that had found each other in the most unexpected way, built on understanding and second chances and the kind of love that doesn't ask permission before changing everything.
3 months into their relationship, on a quiet Tuesday evening after Julie had gone to bed, Wyatt sat across from Mallory in his living room. There was a heaviness in his eyes that Mallory had seen glimpses of before but had never fully understood, a shadow that crossed his face sometimes when he watched Julie playing, a tightness in his jaw when she asked him about the future. "There's something I need to tell you," he signed. "Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I didn't know how. I was afraid." Mallory's heart tightened with sudden worry. "What is it?" Wyatt took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he began to sign. 6 months before I met you, before that night in the cafe, I took Julie to the doctor. She had been having trouble hearing her teachers at preschool. I thought maybe it was ear infections. Kids get those all the time, right? Simple, treatable. He paused, his jaw working as he fought to maintain composure. They ran tests, a lot of tests. Hearing tests, genetic tests, scans, and they found something. Mallory felt her chest constrict, already dreading what was coming. Julie has a progressive genetic condition, something Amelia carried but never knew about. It never manifested in her, but she passed it to Julie. The doctors said... His hands faltered. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. They said she'll likely lose her hearing completely by the time she's a teenager. Maybe sooner. They can't know exactly when, but it's inevitable. My little girl is going to go deaf. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible and heartbreaking. Mallory thought of Julie, bright, bubbly, beautiful Julie, who sang silly songs in the car and giggled at cartoon voices and called out, "Daddy, watch," every time she learned something new. Julie, who was learning sign language not as a fun game with Miss Mallory, but as preparation for a future without sound. "That's why she's learning sign language," Mallory signed, the realization washing over her in waves. "That's why you've been teaching her. You're preparing her." Wyatt nodded, his tears slipping down his cheeks now, his composure finally breaking.
"I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to think I was only with you because of what you could offer her. Because that's not true. I fell in love with you, Mallory, everything about you. But I also know that Julie is going to need someone who understands what she's about to go through. Someone who can show her that being deaf doesn't mean her life is over, that she can still be happy, that she can still be whole." He looked at her with raw, devastating vulnerability. "I'm terrified, Mallory. I'm terrified of watching my little girl lose something so precious and not being able to stop it. I'm terrified of not being enough for her when it happens. I learned sign language for my brother, but this is different. This is my baby. This is my whole world. And I don't know how to prepare her for a silence she's never known, for a world that might not understand her,
for all the struggles I've watched you face. I don't know how to save her from this." Mallory was crying too now, but she reached across and took Wyatt's hands in hers, stilling them. Then she pulled back and signed, slowly and deliberately, making sure he understood every single word. "When I was 7 years old, I woke up one morning and the world was silent. No birds singing outside my window, no cars driving past, no sound of my mother making breakfast in the kitchen. I screamed, but I couldn't hear my own voice. I thought I had died. I thought I was trapped in some kind of nightmare that I'd never wake up from." She paused, steadying herself against the memories. "For years I grieved. I grieved for music I would never hear again, for laughter, for my mother's voice reading me bedtime stories, for all the sounds I didn't even know I would miss until they were gone. I was angry. I was lost. I felt broken." Her hands moved with more intensity now. "But then I discovered something. I discovered that silence has its own kind of beauty. I discovered that my hands could speak louder and more eloquently than my voice ever did. I discovered that being deaf didn't make me less, it just made me different. It gave me a different perspective, a different way of experiencing the world, a different kind of strength." She squeezed his hands again, her eyes fierce with conviction. "Yulie is going to grieve, and that's okay. That's healthy. That's human. But she's also going to discover a whole new world, a world I can show her. I can teach her that silence isn't emptiness. I can teach her how to listen with her eyes, how to speak with her hands, how to feel music through vibrations in her chest. I can teach her that the deaf community is beautiful and vibrant and full of people who will understand her completely. I can teach her that she will never, ever be alone." Tears were streaming down both their faces now.
"And most importantly," Mallory continued, "I can show her what you've been terrified she wouldn't see, that she can still be happy, she can still fall in love, she can still achieve her dreams, she can still be whole. Because I am whole, Wyatt. My deafness doesn't define me, it's just part of who I am, and Julie's deafness won't define her either." Wyatt broke down completely. He pulled Mallory into his arms and held her like she was the only thing keeping him from shattering into a million pieces. When he finally pulled back, he signed with shaking hands, "I thought I saved you that night in the cafe, but I think maybe you were sent to save us." Mallory smiled through her tears, signing back, "Maybe we were sent to save each other." From that day forward, everything shifted into sharper focus. Mallory threw herself into preparing Julie for the transition ahead, but not in a way that felt heavy or scary. She made learning sign language feel like discovering a superpower, like unlocking a secret code that only special people could understand. She took Julie to deaf community events on weekends, picnics in the park where children and adults signed and laughed and played together, weekend gatherings where nobody felt left out or different, storytelling sessions where deaf performers used their entire bodies to bring stories to life in ways that spoken words never could. "Daddy, look!" Julie said one Saturday afternoon, bouncing with excitement after a community picnic. Her hands moved rapidly as she signed. "I made a new friend named Oliver, and he taught me how to say butterfly and rainbow and best friends forever."
She demonstrated each sign with exaggerated enthusiasm, her little face glowing with pure joy. Wyatt watched his daughter, so full of happiness, so completely unafraid of what was coming, and felt something loosen in his chest. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there, hovering at the edges of his thoughts. But it was no longer suffocating him. It was no longer the only thing he could see when he looked at his daughter's future. Because Julie wasn't just learning to be deaf, she was learning to be part of a community. She was learning that different didn't mean less. She was learning that she would never be alone. Mallory also started teaching Julie practical things, how to feel vibrations in music by putting her hand on a speaker, how to use visual timers and alarms, how to advocate for herself when people didn't understand. But she did it all through play, through games, through activities that felt fun rather than frightening. One evening, Mallory brought over a keyboard and showed Julie how to feel the vibrations of different notes through the wood. "Can you feel this one?" Mallory signed, playing a deep bass note. Julie put her small hand on the keyboard and her eyes went wide. "It tickles! Do another one." They spent an hour playing with sound as vibration, with music as something you could feel in your bones rather than just hear with your ears. And when Wyatt tucked Julie into bed that night, she signed sleepily, "Miss Mallory says music lives in your heart, not your ears." "I like that, Daddy." "Me too, sweetheart," Wyatt signed back. "Me too."
Months passed like pages turning in a book you never want to end. Julie's hearing continued to decline gradually, some sounds becoming muffled, some frequencies disappearing entirely, but she adapted with the resilience of childhood and the support of two people who loved her more than life itself. She started using hearing aids, which she decorated with sparkly stickers and called her magic ears. When other kids at school asked about them, she would explain proudly in a mixture of spoken words and signs that they helped her hear better and that she was learning a special language with her hands. Most of the kids thought it was the coolest thing ever. A few didn't understand and said mean things, but Mallory taught Julie how to handle that too. "Some people are scared of things they don't understand," Mallory signed to her one afternoon after a particularly hard day at school. "But that's their problem, not yours. You don't need to make yourself smaller so other people feel comfortable. You just need to be yourself, and the right people will see how amazing you are." Julie hugged her tight and signed, "You're the best, Miss Mallory. I'm glad Daddy found you." "I'm glad he found me too," Mallory signed back. "Actually, I'm glad I found both of you." On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after the night Mallory burst through the cafe doors in terror, Wyatt took both Mallory and Julie back to Brennan's Corner Cafe. They sat at the same table by the window, the same table where their lives had changed forever.
Julie, now 5 years old and wearing her sparkly hearing aids, had a plate of chicken nuggets arranged into a smiley face in front of her, just like that first night. But this time, there was no fear, no panic, no desperation, just 3 people who had found each other against all odds. "Daddy," Julie said, tugging his sleeve, "can I say something to Miss Mallory in sign language? I practiced really hard and I want it to be perfect." Wyatt nodded, his heart so full it felt like it might overflow. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Julie turned to Mallory, her little face scrunched with concentration. Slowly, carefully, with the deliberateness of a child who wants to get every gesture exactly right, she formed the signs. "Thank you for teaching me. I'm not scared anymore. I love you." Mallory's hand flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she pulled Julie into her arms, holding her tight against her chest, rocking her gently. "I love you too," Mallory signed, when she could finally compose herself. "So much." Wyatt watched them, his daughter and the woman he loved, both of them crying and laughing and signing and hugging, and thought about fate. About that terrifying evening a year ago when a panicked woman burst through the cafe doors and changed their lives forever. About all the coincidences that had to align perfectly for them to find each other. If Mallory hadn't left her phone at home, if she had chosen a different cafe, if he and Julie had stayed home that night instead of keeping their Saturday tradition, if he never learned sign language for his brother, if any single element had been different, they never would have found each other. But they had. Against all odds, despite all the fear and pain and grief that had brought them to that moment, they had found each other. Wyatt had thought he was saving Mallory that night. He had thought he was the rescuer, the hero, the one who swooped in and made everything better. But the truth was so much more beautiful than that. Mallory had saved them too. She had saved Julie from facing her future alone. She had saved Wyatt from drowning in fear about something he couldn't prevent. She had saved their small family from isolation, from grief, from the weight of carrying their burdens alone. They had saved each other. And in doing so, they had built something neither of them could have imagined a year ago, a family bound not by blood or tragedy, but by understanding, by choice,
by the quiet language of hands that speak directly to the heart. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that the darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful connections, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Everbell's Stories. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that they're never truly alone, that understanding can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people we're meant to find are the ones we meet when we're at our most vulnerable. Leave a comment telling me about a time when a stranger became important in your life, or when someone understood you when no one else could. Your stories matter, and I read every single one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.